In this video, I'm going to show how I made this sofa table with rounded ends. I started with some 6/4 poplar that I trimmed to manageable lengths. I jointed one edge, and after cleaning up the opposite edge, I then took the pieces to the planer to get them flat. I laid out 3 large pieces for the top and marked some dowel locations. I used the dowel max to drill 3/8 dowel holes. Using plenty of glue, I joined the top boards together, making sure to coat both mating surfaces. Clamped the panel together and cleaned up any squeeze out. Moving on to the base pieces, I cut down some 5/4 poplar. I jointed and ripped pieces for the legs. I prepared the legs by gluing together 3 of the 5/4 poplar pieces. Using this handy little roller makes this job a lot easier, faster, and I think just a little bit more consistent. After drying, I jointed a face and ripped the legs to rough thickness. I'm not sure why the camera turns so bright during these shots. I serviced them first at the planer, and then I brought them to the drum sander. After which I trimmed the length at the table saw. And using this diagram, I prepared to make a series of mortises. One face will receive a 3/4 inch mortise, another a 1/2 inch mortise, and another a 1/4 inch mortise. The mortises will accept all the apron pieces of the table base. Here I was just testing the fit. And here are all the mortises. I prepared aprons in the same fashion as the other milled pieces you've seen thus far, cutting them to manageable lengths, taking them to the joiner, table saw, planer. However, before taking these to the planer, I resawed these pieces at the bandsaw to 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/4 inch thickness. Now the planer did leave these pretty rough, and to get the perfect fit I ended up using the drum sander. I laid out some lines that are going to give the aprons a sort of beadboard-like effect, and you'll see that once I actually make these cuts. Here was a test cut. and I made all of these apron pieces. I'm expecting to take the short ones and steam bend them, and we're gonna see that did not work out. Here were the results of steam bending. I think I just cooked the pieces completely. So I decided to just move on to tapering the legs until I figure out a better way to bend those pieces. I just made a simple tapering sled that'll keep all the legs consistent. Okay, back to the curved aprons. So I resawed thin panels and thicknessed them down at the drum sander to about 2 millimeter. And I made about 8 of these. So I'm going to be laminating them after bending them. And hopefully this will give me that 12-inch curve. You'll see what I'm talking about once I actually put these in the mold. And I'm thinking at this thickness they will definitely bend. So I made a mold prior to steam bending, and this is how I went about doing that. It's pretty simple, just a whole bunch of semicircles. And I glued some spacers between them to give me plenty of width. So you can see this is plenty wide, and those hooks are going to be used for some rubber bands. I have some large rubber bands, actually from StewMac, a guitar supply, luthier supply store, and when you buy kits, they give you these giant rubber bands. So I do have the privilege of using this bender that's used for guitar sides. This actually was just a little bit of insurance so that these do end up bending. I know that plenty of people bend wood in their oven, they bend using bending irons, they could bend using steam bending like I tried, and you may have more luck with that. I know that this was a surefire way of getting these to bend. So I also had this secondary mold just to move on with the process, take them out of this mold and move them to the other. So I glued up all these thin panels, clamped them back into the mold shape. It wasn't a perfect lamination, I don't have a vacuum clamp, however, it got the job done. Being that this is a 12-inch curve, it's kind of a tight bend, and these 2 millimeter strips presented absolutely no issues with bending into this shape, especially after already gaining that memory from being in the mold. Okay, so this is actually the next day, and I'm taking it out of the mold, and my plan is to use a scraper to flatten these pieces. And I tried it, and it worked. However, it was kind of inconsistent. I was getting some flat spots. So I actually later ditched the scraper and took it over to my drum sander, opened the lid, and just used that as a giant rolling pin sander. I don't have a drill rolling pin sander like they sell. I think Grizzly sells one, but the drum sander worked. So I needed to get all of these cuts over that curved surface. So I thought this was maybe my most ingenious move for making this project, and it was to take some tape and put it over the aprons that are already cut and then use that tape to transfer them to the curved surface. I don't know. It seemed pretty smart at the time. It was kind of one of those aha moments. Now this was kind of nerve-wracking. I was afraid that I was going to flex the piece and, possibly get a kickback that rips this whole thing apart. Luckily, because of all these laminations, it's pretty stiff. So this really wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. I then just trimmed the height of these aprons at the bandsaw. When gluing everything up, I made sure everything was just oversized so I didn't have to line everything up perfectly, especially while it was swimming around in all of that glue. At the router table, I created this rabbet that's going to accept a decorative strip at the bottom of the apron, and you'll see that soon. I also laminated these strips to build up the thickness. I knew I was getting closer to assembling this whole project, so what I consider a sub-assembly of this entire table I put together at this step. There's a connector apron that's actually hidden underneath the table, and that's these, I think they're like 11-inch pieces that I'm connecting right now. And the sub-assembly is complete. Here's one of those decorative strips I mentioned. Just clips right in. Then I glued it up. Now you can see I have a level clamped to the top. This is going to help me get those rounded ends coplanar with the top of all the other aprons. I was afraid it was going to just sag down towards the end. Now I prepared all these thin strips to be laminated to create the decorative strip at the bottom of the curved aprons. This took about 8 laminations each. I had to make these strips pretty thin. I was afraid that they would snap. I don't know. I could have made them a little bit thicker, but 8 laminations was no big deal. It only takes about maybe 30 minutes for this glue to tack up, and then I just moved on to the next one. Now, moving on to the top, I ran this through the drum sander just to smooth everything out, and then I tried trimming the round ends at the bandsaw, and that was just too cumbersome. This top weighs a lot, being 6/4, so I just used a jigsaw. Sometimes you have to take the tool to the workpiece. So I did have some minor snipe from the drum sander. It was barely noticeable, but I was afraid that it would show up considering this is the top. It's going to be reflecting a lot of light. So I just cleaned everything up with a scraper and then moved on to final sanding with 150 grit. Okay, now I was going to be putting this top on, and I needed to account for any kind of wood movement in the top, so I needed to use some kind of flexible fastener, and I decided to use some figure 8 brackets, and you'll see these are actually bike chain links. I took a bike chain apart maybe a year ago, and I've been using these links ever since, and you can see they move around, which allows the top to expand. If I were to just screw the top down into the base, it would just eventually split. And here it is all together. It's ready for paint. Luckily, I'm not going to be doing that step anytime soon. I'm going to put that on the back burner. I'm actually going to be spraying this piece, and that's going to be my first time ever using a sprayer, so that should be interesting. Now, if you like this video and you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel. If there was something you learned in this video, please drop a like on it or leave a comment below, and I hope to make more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching.